Okay, we have another question about Waxman-Markey. The questioner says, legislation currently gives away huge percentage of the pollution permits rather than selling them. Doesn't this greatly undermine incentives for these stakeholders or those stakeholders receiving free permits to reduce fossil fuel use? And then what do you think will happen to the permits as legislation continues to get amended? So that's two questions. And what other amendments do you think will be incorporated? It's hard to see the future here, isn't it?
Yeah, this is, I wish I could predict. This is going to face pressure in that full House, in Senate committees, and in the full Senate, and then in conference. So there's potential for many, many things to get altered. Clearly the battle is going to be about, one of the battles is going to be about how much reduction, how quickly, and who pays for that reduction. And it will get played out in many different technical forms. I'd like to see more of the permits auctioned. There's an excellent argument for that. The proceeds from the auction need to be used to facilitate the transition, and they need to be used to make ordinary Americans everywhere see a win in this and see the benefit of participation. That is, those are some of the key points that need to be carried through. And as all this goes on, there's the question about EPA or other administrative action, and there's a bit of a good cop, bad cop flavor to the whole discussion, where many people who would rather see nothing done would still choose to see a piece of legislation that they can participate in shaping than an administrative action that they have no involvement in.
I could just make one other comment. In Climate Earth looking at this, our understanding is that there's 14 Democratic senators from the middle part of the country who are faced with some real challenges in that those states are dependent on coal-fired power plants for the vast majority of their energy and a lot of their economy. And so for them, managing the transition is very, very challenging, and the sort of political versus scientific battle is going to be pretty intense over the next months as the legislation comes into the Senate.
Yeah, that's right. And it's important that as we look at this, we don't demonize people. The people who represent coal states and industrial states, and not that you said this, Chris, but I do want to just kind of make this point. These are well-intentioned people for the most part, and they're looking out for their constituents, and that's the way our process works. And we have to make sure that whatever gets shaped here does kind of take into account regional differences. For example, in the South is left endowed with alternative energy assets. They don't have great sun, and in many cases they don't have great wind. So some of the pushback on the renewable energy standards is coming from states that feel themselves less able to comply than some of the other states.
Here's a pretty interesting question, given that CO2 has now been deemed a pollutant. The question is from Kerry Strand, and the question is, if Waxman-Markey continues to be watered down, do you envision the EPA stepping in?
Well, that's clearly looming. And people on the other side are clearly worried about that. There are provisions in the current bill that limit the EPA's power to regulate as part of crafting this legislation. So the negotiation is going to go down. It's going to continue along the lines of what can the EPA do and not do, what will the legislation do and not do, and those factors will affect each other.
There's sort of a general question here that probably warrants some discussion. What about the idea that climate change is not a business or political issue, but a science issue? That's the basic question here. He goes on to say, as such, we should also frame this as a cost of action versus cost of inaction. The cost of preventing climate change pale in comparison with the costs of dealing with the results of a changing climate. It's time for this generation to pay this cost now rather than shifting the burden to future generations.
I think you're absolutely right on a lot of that, and different groups make different kinds of arguments. Many people have done terrific work laying out the cost of failing to address this, and clearly the longer we wait, the more those costs climb. In dealing with business community per se, we run into a couple of problems. First off, the business audience is accustomed to looking at large, complex models, which have kind of a hockey stick character, where all the important stuff happens in the out years. And in those models, small changes in the input assumptions have big changes in the results. And so many people are skeptical of those. And particularly because the stuff is so complex, if you don't have a PhD in climatology or some similar field, your own ability to look into the model and the model assumptions is very limited, and it's ultimately a question of taking someone else's word for things. We found that as important as all those issues are, the situation is that many environmental groups are doing a great job of presenting those issues, and the people who respond to those arguments absorb that and benefit from it, and it contributes a lot to the discussion. We choose to focus in the way we did because the more clear and near term we can make this, and the less dependent on very long-term projections, the more compelling an issue this is for a lot of the people that we feel need to be influenced.
I've got a simple question for you, and then we've got a couple more interesting ones coming in over the wire. Thank you. The simple question is, you mentioned that individuals join New Voice of Business. How is that done?
People just go to our website, www.newvoiceofbusiness.org, and on the top left corner of the website, enter your contact information, and now you'll receive information from us. And there's a join button across the top where you can get more engaged at varying levels of membership. If you're in the Bay Area, we do a monthly live salon on topics mostly in energy and climate change, but also on broader issues of sustainability. If you sign up, you will be notified of those events as they're coming up, and I hope to have a chance to meet you live.
A question about Carol Browner coming in. And the question reads, says, Carol Browner, she ran from climate change issues in the 90s when she served as EPA chief. She buried it within the EPA and stifled communications on the subject from her agency. Now she is climate change czar. We never see her name mentioned in the news on all these climate change-related articles. What kind of role is she actually playing these days? Obstructionist and fossil fuel appeaser as she did in the 90s, or some other role?
Well, I don't really know to comment specifically on what role she's playing here. I do know from everything that I'm hearing that the Obama administration is extremely committed to doing this, is fast-tracking it, is working closely with both the House and the Senate leadership to make this happen.
We're getting close to running out of time, so I'm going to turn it back over to Frankie to do a wrap-up for us.
Thank you, David, for that insightful and very thought-provoking presentation. I'm sure everybody in the audience appreciates that. If you would like to share this webinar with other people, a recording will be posted on our website in the near future, and you can find that at climateearth.com. Also, if you're interested in learning more about New Voice of Business, please visit their website at newvoiceofbusiness.org. I'd like to thank everybody for attending today, especially new attendees, and we hope to see you for our next webinar. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.